Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Inner YouTube channel. I'm Kira, and today, as part of our Authors Corner series, I'll be having a conversation with Zak Salih about his new novel, Let's Get Back to the Party from Algonquin Books. You can find links to the rest of our Zak content this month, like articles, readings, and podcast features on our website, linked in the description. Welcome, Zak.
Oh, wow. Zak content. I love that.
We have a whole host of Zak content, all linked on our website. We're going to have ads on Facebook, everything, everywhere, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, all over.
God, as if the world needs any more of that. But thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, of course. So first, I'd love to talk about, so Let's Get Back to the Party is your first novel, yes?
Yes, yeah, it's my debut novel. It came out on February 16th. So he's been out in the world for a few months. And yeah, I feel like the kind of rush of debuting or publishing any book has kind of settled now. And so I realized that, wow, I actually have to sit down and write more. Like, it doesn't just the life of a writer doesn't end with or doesn't culminate in just one book. It's really like I have to sit and I have to do this all over again and be with myself in a room but I've been very fortunate, and it's been very, very well received. I've gotten a lot of just kind of endearing messages from strangers, and it sounds trite, but it really is true that those just mean the world. I think when any reader kind of responds to your work or feels kind of compelled to tell you how much they enjoyed it. I mean, whether it's published or whether it's just something you're sharing with people to get critique or to get feedback. I mean, it's kind of a soul boost. So yeah.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. That's wonderful. I was going to ask about the transition process between short fiction and the nonfiction you've written previously and to such a long form project, especially hearing feedback so directly about like a larger body of work. So how was that transition for you?
Yeah, so for me, it started with nonfiction, writing a lot of reviews. I wrote some critical essays and some personal essays, usually for newspapers and alternative weeklies. And I did that for quite a while. And I want to preface the caveat by saying that criticism is in and of itself an art form. But for me personally, and in my personal journey, I think I spent so much time reviewing books because I was terrified of the actual commitment of sitting down and not only writing my own novel, but really working on fiction, which is something that I'd always wanted to do, but I been terrified of doing for the same
absolutely
that terrify every writer. So it was really kind of a progression. And then I want to say in the winter of 2017, I really kind of sat down and committed myself to writing a draft of this novel, which I'd kind of had bouncing around in my head. And then kind of in between drafts or waiting for feedback from other people, I experimented with short fiction. And really, so these last 3-4 years have really been about me just kind of focusing on fiction and kind of trying my hand at it and seeing what works and seeing what doesn't, and kind of what I enjoy about short fiction versus what I enjoy about longer novel-sized projects. And yeah, so it's kind of been a journey of exploration, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting to hear you say you learned. What is something you would do differently if you were for your next novel? I don't mean to pressure you.
What is something I would do differently? I'm not really sure, Kira, because I feel like every project brings its own troubles and its own approaches. So the way that I approach this novel might not necessarily be the way that I approach, a short story or, another kind of long form project. But I can say, like, the kind of key that really helped me as a writer was really, was kind of recognizing that if a first draft is not, am I allowed to curse on this?
Yeah, I'll bleep it if Courtney or Rachel say it's not okay.
if a first draft is not a piece of shit, I would argue you're not doing it right. And that part of writing is kind of embracing and to kind of disgustingly extend the metaphor, plow through it, right? And realize that first drafts are really just about getting everything down on the page, even if 90% of it is terrible, as it is in most cases, or at least in my case when I first started working on this book. But really kind of giving yourself that freedom to make a mess and to play around and to kind of think of yourself, I don't know, almost like a kindergartner playing with finger paint, right? Like the goal is to be creative by making a mess. And then from there, you continually go through that awkward process of refining it and refining it. And to me, I think I really started to take myself seriously as a writer when I found more enjoyment in revising than actually in writing a first draft. I mean, to me, like, if I have all that work out here, printed out in a stack on my desk, I mean, regardless of how terrible it is, it's a physical object, right? And so it's you can see it and you can kind of make sense of it. So, for me, like, and I'm in the middle of revising another long form project now, and like,
congratulations.
That's great. Like the 2 years of actually drafting it were miserable, were awkward. But just to kind of have it in front of me and to have something to work with. I don't know, that idea of drafts as a physical object just has really kind of helped me learn how to be a better writer.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And congratulations, you're already so deep into your next project.
I guess I'm a glutton for punishment. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, thanks.
Yeah. So this novel is incredibly precise when it comes to time and place. We jump into Sebastian and Oscar's lives shortly after the legalization of gay marriage and close the novel in the wake of the Pulse shooting. How did the timeline for this book develop?
You mean the timeline of the narrative?
Yes, because it's incredibly precise, right? You're not afraid to be like, this is exactly what's happening at this moment in history, and that kind of guides the text. How did you come to that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, so for me, kind of the beating heart of this novel, as unapologetically gay as it is, and as its main characters are, it's really more to me, really just about how people cope with the passing of time, and so given that. I should say the ways that people cope and the ways that people fail to cope.
I love that. Yeah.
Because there's more drama, of course, and more interest in people who fail to cope. I mean, if we all knew how to cope with time, I don't think that would make for a really fun reading or writing experience. But so time was always very important to the story, and so. I knew that I wanted to set it in this distinct year, and these kind of two very public moments in gay and in queer history. The Supreme Court marriage ruling, this moment of very kind of public joy and celebration, and then followed almost exactly a year later by the Pulse nightclub shooting, and so in that kind of year that's bracketed by these very high and low moments, it seemed to me a very interesting lab in which to kind of experiment with the way that these two gay men were trying and perhaps failing to come to terms with kind of who they are and their place in the community. Because the novel is, in talking about the novel, I've started to kind of describe it as not a coming out novel, but about a coming into a community, right? So, we have these very traditional and very important, coming out stories, right? And what I was really interested in exploring with this novel is, let's assume that these characters have kind of finished that process of coming out, and of course we can argue that it's never finished. But kind of what happens after and how do they see themselves in relation, not just to themselves, but to their own community. And so given that, that kind of year-long span in the story, it really felt like I could set it in no other place.
Yeah, that urgency is absolutely there. I know, like, we talked to students about, like, why is this the period of time we're reading of these characters? And in this book especially, it's like, it's so clear that like it works really well. Yeah.
Oh, cool. Thank you very much for saying that.
Yeah. That actually, thinking about coming out and coming in, that's so interesting. I saw that this book is labeled, at least on bookshop.org, where the audience should go purchase the book right now, wink, wink. It's labeled as a coming of age story, despite the characters being older than is traditional for that genre. how do you think about coming of age in the context of queer narratives, where that experience is often really different in time and scale?
Yeah. Well, I guess I should say first of all, I mean, a lot of that marketing stuff is kind of not up to the writer. So in terms of how a book is positioned, I mean, there are plenty of marketing experts who are very, very good at kind of positioning a book and kind of coming up with kind of descriptors of where to put it. So in writing it, I never really thought of it as a coming of age novel. But now that I've kind of sat with it and I've had people respond to it, it really makes sense. I guess I always thought coming of age stories were, about teens becoming adults.
Yeah.
But I guess, in this respect, or in respect for this novel, I mean, the coming of age is really about a different kind of growth and development, not necessarily one related to age, but I suppose related to one's kind of sense of self and one's place in the community. I mean, there's a theme throughout the book of kind of making a transition from boyhood to manhood, right? And
Yeah.
to me, in my mind, in the way that these characters operate, I mean, they're technically men, right? But there are certain things, I think, that kind of hold them back from the kind of maturity that we expect from well, adulthood, but in this case manhood, which is really just kind of realizing that you have a place in a lineage, right? Like sometimes you're the future, sometimes you're the present, and sometimes you're the past. And kind of, to me, the idea of real adulthood comes from kind of understanding that, it's about making a transition from a kind of I approach to the world and to a we approach, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Did
Huh.
that answer your question?
Yes, no, it
Okay,
did.
okay.
And it's interesting to hear about that kind of sentiment being reflected back to you as something that maybe you didn't originally intend or think about in writing. But then, writing is really solitary. You expose your work to a group of people, they reflect back to you things
Yeah.
that you might not have considered. Were there other things like that? I'm so curious, like things that readers reflected back to you that you didn't initially see.
Oh yeah. I mean, you always you hear back from readers and they see things that maybe you didn't see or that you didn't intend. And sometimes you're like, oh damn, like I wish I had known that before. I
Yeah.
would have written an entirely different book. Um,
Yeah.
or it changed the focus. But I mean, that's, to me, I guess that's the nature of writing. And then, or it's one thing to write, and then it's another thing to share your writing with other people. And so kind of in that engagement, I think there's so much more that a writer can discover about their work. And so in that regard, it's kind of like, it just, the work kind of never ends, I think, in that sense.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exciting and kind of terrifying. Excellent. Okay, so at the core of the novel are cross-generational queer relationships. We can read the development of Sebastian and Oscar in their first-person narration, but how did you find the voices for high schooler Arthur and especially AIDS era icon Sean? I know for me personally, Sean's letter towards the end of the novel is one of my favorite sections because you get really pulled out of Oscar's head and you're like, oh, this is how
Yeah.
people see him,
Yeah.
and like this is how the world kind of exists outside of his limited perspective. And yeah, how did you find those voices?
Oh, trial and error, I think. And that's certainly an area where I think having other readers and having an editor and people who can kind of read and offer you feedback help. I mean, for the obvious reason that I belong to neither of those generations.
Yeah.
But I always operate in writing about characters who are kind of outside my purview. I mean, I always operate as a writer under the assumption that there is some kind of commonality that I share with a 17-year-old high schooler, or a man in his 60s who is seeing the world just so transformed from the way it was 30 years ago. And so I approach it from kind of that perspective, with this idea that there are kind of common, not necessarily shared experiences, but kind of shared emotions, and shared attitudes. And so I think really kind of searching for that, for me at least, was a really good entryway into kind of inhabiting those lives briefly. Although, I will say, we never inhabit them the same way that we do Oscar and Sebastian. I mean, it is very much their story, and the high school student Arthur and the writer Sean are certainly real characters, but we kind of have to remember that everything we're seeing about them is filtered through this very kind of hyper involved first person perspective. And I had played with kind of really opening up the novel at the beginning and kind of inhabiting all four voices equally and seeing where that took me.
Oh, interesting.
But I really wanted it to be about Oscar and Sebastian and about how they perceive the world and how they fail to perceive the world, and how the things we think we see in people are not what's really there, and how the people we kind of idolize let us down, not because they've done something wrong necessarily, but just because they're human and they're complex.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so interesting to hear that in early drafts you were thinking about exploring all four voices. Could you talk us through even just like some of the early draft making process, or what things got discarded and when things got held up?
Yeah, that I would say is the biggest thing that got discarded, and kind of playing with their voices. It's talking about writing, first drafts. I mean, I just the other day I was putting away some papers and looking through like a first draft, and there are people there who mysteriously disappear like 20 pages in. I mean, you're really just kind of like winging it as you go along, or at least I was on the first draft. But I think the structure, I'm really big on structure. And I think about the architecture of a work when I'm writing it, and oftentimes the structure of the book will lead me into the actual writing of it as much as an image or a line will. And so the kind of duality, I just ultimately here, I just felt like opening it up to all four voices made it a bit too big and shaggy. And I suppose in the back of my mind, I always thought of this novel as something kind of very sleek and slim. And it really took away from the kind of diametrical opposition that I wanted the reader to feel between Oscar and Sebastian. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it leads to several really lovely moments of surprise and inversion. Like the moment where Sebastian looks at Arthur and he's like, "You're not the boy that I thought you were," has this really like powerful turn to it that maybe wouldn't have been the same if we had been able to see into Arthur's head.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, there is kind of a theme of kind of images and what's more important, the idea of someone or the person themselves. And yeah, I think you're right. I think that would have been lost if we had equal access to the kind of interior lives of Sean and Arthur. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing that is really central to this text is visual art and how present it is. I found myself reading next to my laptop and like Googling the paintings so that I could see what they look like next to each section.
That's great to hear, because I love coming across things, especially visual art references in novels, and then looking them up. So I'm really happy to hear that, because that is exactly what I wanted people to do. So
I feel like nobody will ever be able to look at that shark painting without thinking of this novel. You've captured it as your own. But yeah, I wanted to ask you about your experience with visual art and how that informs your writing.
Yeah. My experience is honestly as to be, just a tourist. I'm no scholar of visual art. I took one art class in college. It was a general education course. I didn't even take AP Art History in high school, which I, of course,
that's so surprising.
After having written this book, if I could go back and do it all over again, which is a theme of this book, I would probably minor in art history. I bring nothing to it other than just a kind of appreciation for it. I can't paint, I can't sculpt, I can't draw, but I can look at a painting or sculpture or a drawing and kind of get lost. And so that was kind of my through line. And in kind of making Sebastian an art history teacher, it allowed me to kind of insert these memories that he has that are inspired by some of the works of art that he encounters or that he teaches to his students. and a way to kind of reflect something else that I enjoy about appreciating art or viewing art, which is it's not just about, it's always a two-way street, right? Like you're interpreting the artwork in front of you, but the work of art is also, sparking, memories or feelings that are personal that the artist has absolutely no awareness of. And so those kind of moments in Sebastian's narrative where we hear his history as kind of sparked by these works of art. I just, they were the most fun, I think, for me to write. I don't think a whole novel like that could have been sustainable. But, going back to your earlier question about things that were taken out, there were a couple sections just that, it just kind of felt like it was a bit too much. So I took a few of those out. But yeah, those were hands down the easiest and the most enjoyable parts to write. So.
Oh, that comes across.
And
They're fun to read.
Oh, thanks. And they're the ones that people seem to respond to the most, which is great. And it makes me wonder, maybe I should have written the whole book like that. But yeah, I just love museums, and I got to go back to the National Gallery of Art a few months ago when they reopened, and I got to see Watson and the Shark. So if anyone's interested in seeing it, it's right downtown and it's free. And yeah, art museums and movie theaters have just always kind of been just these kind of I don't know, just very restorative. Not only as someone who appreciates them, but also as someone who likes to think that he's creating them. Whenever I feel stuck, I watch a movie I enjoy, or I go to a museum and I don't know, I can't really explain it, but I always just come away from it feeling, just kind of rejuvenated and inspired.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it creates writing that feels really intimate and tender, even when the painting is like Saturn eating his son, which is not an intimate or tender painting. But the idea of like someone who is like so specifically connecting these moments to memories, and it's really evocative.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for saying so.
Yeah. So for the Authors Corner project, we're promoting authors who have published with small indie presses. Can you talk us through your publication process and your experience in general with Algonquin Books?
Yeah. Well, I mean, Algonquin is an indie publisher, and they're out of Chapel Hill. They have offices in New York City, and they've just been publishing some of the most amazing fiction over the last few years. So it's really been an incredible privilege to be working with them. I mean, my path to working and collaborating with Algonquin Books was, it's. I mean, I hate to say like the traditional way, but I spent 6 months. I tried to find an agent. When that didn't happen, I sat and completely revised the book, and then searched for an agent again. And I happened to find an amazing agent, and she and I worked on the novel, and then sent it out. And Algonquin saw something in it, and so yeah, and so then they bought it, and I worked with my amazing editor on a round or two of edits, and then because they're a smaller publisher, it kind of went in a queue. They only publish a certain amount of books a year, so they really put a lot of care into each of their books, which you could argue might be different at a giant publisher where they're kind of just churning out books left and right.
Yeah.
So that wait was kind of frustrating as someone who has no patience whatsoever. It was a very good lesson in learning how to be patient. But I mean, whether you're working with an indie publisher or one of the big 5 publishers, or a really small indie publisher, I mean, it seems to me like the most important thing is collaborating with people who get what you're trying to do. And that's certainly what I felt at Algonquin. And that's something that I would say any writer, and it's hard, right? Because you as a writer, you just want your stuff to be published. But if it's being published by someone who is not really passionate about what you've done and what you've created, it can be, it can be difficult to say no. But you really in any kind of publisher, yeah, you really just want to work with good people, whether you're working with them just for the one book, whether you end up publishing everything you ever write with them. I mean, yeah, it's a very collaborative thing.
Yeah, absolutely. We've spoken to the previous two authors for this project, or the first two that we've done. We're both poets, and they were like, it's completely different.
Oh, really? How so?
Yeah, apparently, like poetry and fiction publishing completely different. I believe Megan submitted her manuscript and won a prize from the publisher, and then the prize ended in publication.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And there's a whole series. They were both like, agents are not a thing in our world, so it's interesting to get insight into how that works in the revision
Yeah,
process,
yeah, and
working with new people.
yeah, it's a slog, and I have the great good fortune to have a wonderful agent now, but in those months when you're searching and you're just getting rejections, I mean, it's incredibly demoralizing. And you either, have to be very stupid or just very resilient in order to just keep doing it, or I suppose a masochist.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you don't have a huge stack of rejection letters, I would argue you're not doing it right either. You need a first draft that's complete shit, and
checklist, Zak Salih checklist. You heard it here first.
yeah, and then you need an intimidating pile of rejection letters, and you need them to keep coming even after you've been published. That's just something that I've heard from other people, and I'm learning, firsthand that publication doesn't magically stop rejection, and so the goal of one of the things of being a writer is becoming friends with rejection, I guess. Believe me, Kira, it's easier said than done. Like I say this right now, and then I'll get a rejection letter for a short story in my email. I'll just be like, oh god damn it, like what kind of writer am I? But that's just that's the messy reality of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Out of curiosity, what was the amount of time between like, okay, my draft is finished, I'm ready, to like having the book in your hands?
You mean when I felt comfortable with the draft to start finding an agent, or? Yeah, so I started drafting. I mean, I'd been having the novel had been in my head, but I had never really sat down to write it until the winter of 2017. I left my job and I went to work freelance so I could devote more time to writing. I told myself I'd give myself 6 months to write as many drafts as I possibly could. And if nothing came of it, at least I could say I tried. So I want to say I tend to write relatively quickly, again operating under the assumption that the first draft is going to be terrible, and the goal is just to get everything out of there. So I would say like multiple drafts, running it by some readers whose opinion I value. One of whom actually introduced me to the Inner Loop. And then kind of going through that constant back and forth. I would say, I think it was in November that I started to query agents with a draft that I felt comfortable enough showing to other people, or at least a draft where I had gone as far as I could without some kind of industry feedback from some industry expert. And I remember I emailed a draft to one agent, and she got back. She asked for, I think it was like the first 10 or 15 pages of the manuscript, and she got back to me maybe an hour later and said she wanted to read the rest of the book. And I said, oh wow, like this is easy, like
nailed it first try.
Like what's everyone complaining about? And of course they never got back to me, right? And so that's when the whole process of kind of querying agents really kind of extended all through that winter. Then I took a step back and reworked the book a little, not based on any concrete feedback necessarily, but kind of based just on my own idea that something could be improved. And so I went and requeried in the spring, and then I found my agent in April. So that would be April of 2018, and then sold the book to Algonquin that summer. And then, as I said, it's a long pre-production and production process. And then I got the galleys in, I think, Thanksgiving of last year. So Thanksgiving of 2020 is when I actually had some kind of, physical object in my hand. And yeah, and then the hardcovers came in January, and yeah, and then, so I don't know, what is that? I'm a writer. My math is terrible.
Yeah, I know, same. I was like, I probably should have been doing the math while you were talking, but I absolutely did not. I was like, oh yeah, we're gonna get there.
What is that? 4 years? Of course, not assuming all the kind of other work that goes into it, like just the anxiety of thinking about a book, thinking about, taking the plunge and trying to work on my fiction and all that kind of, all those kind of uncounted hours of mental labor.
Yeah, of course.
But yeah.
Well, congratulations again. I have the hardcover and she is lovely. So
yeah, it's that cover is, man. I mean, I like to say, like, for $25.95, you can get that amazing cover and some words.
Yeah, I know a lot of times you don't have control over the cover, so I wasn't sure if I should ask, but did you, who is this? I love it.
Yeah, no, and that's another great thing about my experience working with Algonquin is I felt absolutely included and absolutely on board with a lot of these major editorial decisions. So that was actually the first cover that they showed me. And it was not the cover I had in mind, but it's just, I just had the great good fortune of it being like, it couldn't, I saw it, and, I had originally thinking, oh, it'd be great to put artwork on the cover. But then, the art team over there and the designer, David High, who designed the book, they all presented me with this, and it's just, you look at it and you just, I can't think of it being anything else. So, you think the goal of a book cover is to get someone to pick the book up off a table or off a shelf, and that's exactly what this book does. The rest of it is my responsibility, but in terms of actually getting someone to put their hands on a book, I just think it's not what I expected, it's not what I dreamed of, but I could not dream of anything else now. So
yeah. Oh, incredible. That's
and I have no idea who that very handsome gentleman is.
Yeah, I was thinking it's either a stock photo or your closest friend, and it's nothing in between.
No, I do not know that person, and so I'm assuming it's stock photo. I'm going out on a limb and assuming he doesn't really cry glitter.
You never know.
I mean, you never know, right? You never know. But yeah. So I'm very grateful to that man, whatever his name is, wherever he is.
Thank you to this man. If you're watching this video, send Zach an email. He'd love to chat with you. Okay. Lastly, speaking of, where can our viewers find you and your work? Where are you on the interwebs?
I am at zaksalih.com. So ZAKSALIH. I am on Twitter occasionally at, what is it? I think it's ZM Salih 1982. I prefer Instagram these days. I just feel like it's harder for people to be jerks on Instagram. So
That's true. I find commenting system is so terrible. It's difficult to be a jerk.
Yeah. Anyway, I suppose I find my self-esteem still intact when I've scrolled through Instagram versus when I scroll through Twitter. I don't know if you're the same way, but I kind of gauge how much I engage with social media platforms based on how they make me feel after I've spent
absolutely.
a certain amount of time with them. So I'm on Instagram at ZakiGrams. And my website has links to the novel, obviously, some other pieces that I've written, and stalkers welcome. So.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It was such a pleasure to talk.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This was a real treat. I appreciate it.
Yes, and if you are looking to find more of The Inner Loop, you can subscribe here on our YouTube channel. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram at The Inner Loop Lit, and on Facebook at The Inner Loop. You can also find us at theinnerloop.com, and if you do theinnerloop.com/authors corner, you can find a bunch of more information about Zach as well. Okay, thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, stop recording.